The phone rang, sharp and insistent, cutting through the quiet of my morning. I glanced at the clock, 9:10, and reached for the receiver, expecting a friend or a routine call. It wasn't. My father's voice came through, clipped, without warmth. "Miri, you need to leave the beach house. 24 hours. Pack up and go. It's no longer yours." I froze, the mug of tea in my hand cooling instantly. The sea breeze drifted in from the open window, the gulls calling out, oblivious to my shock. I thought it was a joke, a mistake perhaps. I laughed nervously, hoping the line would crack and he'd say it was only a test of my patience. But there was nothing, just the cold finality of his words. I tried calling back immediately, fingers trembling over the phone keypad. Silence. Redirected to my mother, whose vague murmurs only amplified my confusion. Walking through the rooms, I traced my hands along the walls, touching the furniture as if memorizing every detail for the last time. Photographs stared at me, smiling faces from holidays, birthdays, and quiet evenings that now felt tainted by an impending loss. Did I do something wrong? Am I being punished for something I can't remember? I whispered to myself, pacing, rereading texts, calling Deandra only to be met with emptiness. The realization sunk in, and with it, a spark of anger began to smolder beneath my disbelief. I started making lists, preparing what to take, what to leave behind, each item a fragment of memories I couldn't bear to discard. Sitting on the sun-warmed porch, I remembered when this house had first been ours. After my divorce, my parents had gifted me this home, a sanctuary by the ocean where I rebuilt my life piece by piece. The scent of saltwater and pine had become synonymous with peace, a space that held me together when nothing else could. "I am not someone you discard," I repeated internally, a mantra against the creeping betrayal. Deandra had never known struggle like this. She was the golden one, untouched by hardship, while I had labored quietly, turning walls and floors into a home that cradled my grief and resilience alike. By mid-afternoon, I found myself at the county office, scanning papers and trying to understand a situation that already made no sense. My heart thumped as I saw the deed, signed, finalized, transferred. To Deandra. No warning, no legal process, just the cruel clarity of ink and paper. I ran my finger over her name as if touching a wound that refused to heal. "So this is how quietly families erase you," I muttered under my breath, the anger simmering but controlled, a storm contained behind the veneer of composure. I returned home and began packing with precision, each object placed in a box weighed with memory. Books, photographs, letters, all carefully wrapped. Calm on the surface, but inside, a tempest of frustration, hurt, and disbelief churned. I catalogued not just possessions but years of emotional labor and the silence that had carried me through them. On the mantel, a photograph of my parents and me, faces smiling, unknowing, was turned gently face down. A note was left on the counter, "I hope the golden one enjoys the view." As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the sand, I stepped out to the driveway and glanced back at the house, my home, now someone else's. A neighbor waved, eyebrows raised in confusion at my sudden departure. I nodded politely, heart steady despite the ache in my chest, and climbed into my car. My gaze lingered on the structure one last time before I started the engine. From the glove box, I retrieved a sealed envelope labeled, "In case they ever do this." The weight of it was reassuring, a secret shield for battles yet to come. I exhaled, the horizon stretching before me, and thought, I've lost homes before. But this time, I'm not losing myself. The drive from the beach felt endless, the gray sky overhead matching the heaviness settling in my chest. The waves of the coast faded behind me, replaced by the familiar streets of Portland. My parents' house appeared as it always had, the brick exterior unchanged, the front garden carefully maintained as if nothing in life had shifted. But everything had. Every step up to the porch was weighted with tension, my pulse thrumming in my ears. I rang the bell, took a deep breath, bracing for the confrontation I both dreaded and needed. The door swung open, my mother's face forced into a polite smile. "Didn't expect to see you so soon," she said, words soft but hollow. I stepped inside, the air thick with the unspoken, the familiar scent of lavender and old wood suddenly oppressive. The dinner table was a battlefield in miniature. My father said little, his silence a wall that pressed down harder than any accusation. My mother avoided my gaze, her movements precise and careful, betraying the discomfort they both felt at my presence. Deandra was absent, her absence deliberate, I knew that without asking. I finally spoke, demanding to understand why the beach house had been transferred to her. My parents deflected, offering vague statements, "It's what's best. You always said you didn't want to be tied down." Their words, meant to placate, only deepened the sense of betrayal. Every polite pause, every carefully chosen syllable felt like a calculated test of my restraint. Eventually, my father's mask slipped, revealing the blunt edge I had feared. "Deandra earned it more," he said, unflinching. "She's more dependable, she's building a future." I sat frozen, absorbing the years of emotional neglect now crystallized into this single verdict. I countered, listing the loyalty, the sacrifices, the quiet stewardship of my own life that had gone unnoticed. My mother's words struck like a blade, "You always act like a victim." The fracture between us was not new, but its exposure stung with the freshness of betrayal. Every anecdote of my diligence, every effort to bridge gaps in the family, felt dismissed in the blink of an eye. I excused myself, moving to the hallway to catch my breath, every step heavy with a mix of hurt and disbelief. Outside Deandra's room, I overheard her laughter, her mocking tone slicing through my composure. "She's losing her mind. Always has." They just didn't want to say it out loud. My stomach dropped, old childhood memories flashing, schemes, small betrayals, moments when she had undermined me and our parents had looked the other way. The words echoed, anchoring the sting of abandonment and exposing the deliberate cruelty behind years of favoritism. Returning to the table, I contained my anger, announcing calmly that I would leave early and would not return soon. My voice was measured, the silence of my decision more potent than any shout. I picked up an old family photo, sliding it quietly into my purse, a talisman of all the years that had passed, a reminder of who I was and what had been taken from me. Internally, I vowed, if silence was the weapon they wielded, I would learn to wield it sharper, more deliberately. Each unspoken word, each restrained glance, would carry the weight they thought I could not harness. I left the house under the cover of night, the streets empty as I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. The engine's hum was steady, a contrast to the chaos roiling inside me. I drove without music, letting the darkness guide my thoughts, slowly piecing together a plan that would not leave me powerless again. Reaching for my phone, I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Ezreal?" "I'm ready," I said, my voice calm but firm. I could feel the first stirrings of strategy, the quiet confidence of someone who had been wronged but refused to remain so. The voice that answered was steady, familiar, and assured. "I knew you'd call eventually," it said, and I felt the shift in the tide, the first step in reclaiming the ground they had thought was theirs alone. Morning light crept through the blinds, casting soft stripes across Ezreal's modest living room. I stirred on the couch, disoriented, the silence around me both unfamiliar and comforting. The hum of the city outside contrasted sharply with the turmoil in my mind. Yesterday's confrontation at my parents' home played on repeat, each detail sharper than before. The warmth in Ezreal's apartment, the worn sofa, stacks of books, the faint scent of brewed coffee, was a quiet anchor, a counterpoint to the cold calculation of my family. I let myself linger in the silence, not yet ready to face any messages, any calls, any reminders that the world had noticed my departure. Here, for the first time since the beach house, the weight of betrayal settled, quiet and permanent. Over a cup of coffee, Ezreal's questions nudged at the raw edges of yesterday's wounds. I told him everything I could, each word measured yet unguarded, sharing memories that still ached. High school flashes intruded, a moment when Deandra had framed me for stealing, a minor accusation but a heavy one when our parents sided with her instantly. Their quick belief, the ease of dismissing my protests, had planted the first seeds of doubt, of silence, that had grown into this suffocating chasm. It wasn't the punishment that hurt, I whispered to Ezreal, it was the speed at which they believed her over me. He nodded, reminding me gently that he had seen it too, but I had been too proud to admit it then. The realization that favoritism had always been intentional, a deliberate shaping of our family narrative, gnawed at the edges of my composure. Desperate for leverage, for clarity, I asked if we could access our old shared cloud drive, years of family documents stored in digital shadows. The login felt like stepping into the past, fingers trembling as I entered credentials long forgotten. At first, the folder seemed routine, dust-covered remnants of old-school projects and vacation photos. Then, tucked under an unassuming label, a folder named Legacy Plans caught my eye. My heart hammered as we opened it, revealing PDF files with dates, signatures, and legal verbiage I hadn't seen. Among them, one document stood out, a fully executed agreement transferring ownership of the beach house to Deandra, dated 6 months prior. The evidence was undeniable. Every polite excuse, every vague justification from yesterday was revealed as deliberate, premeditated, a carefully staged betrayal. I read and reread the agreement, the cold, factual language slicing through the lingering ache of yesterday. My parents' signatures, witnessed by a lawyer, stood as proof they had never intended for me to have a choice. Questions and grief collided. Did they ever love me, or simply tolerate my presence? How long had this lie been sustained, quietly gnawing at the foundation of my sense of belonging? It wasn't just a betrayal of property, I murmured to myself, it was erasing my place in the family line. Each word solidified a slow-burning resolve, a shift from disbelief to calculated awareness. Needing air, needing space to breathe, I closed the laptop and walked into the brisk Portland morning. Children played in the nearby park, oblivious to the fractures forming elsewhere, to the quiet turmoil inside me. Life went on, unflinching, indifferent to the betrayals hidden in family walls. I let the chill bite my cheeks, grounding myself, drawing strength from the normalcy around me. The questions of why no longer mattered. What mattered was the how I would respond, how I would reclaim the control stolen so quietly. I planned to print the documents, not to brandish them immediately, but to carry the truth with me, an unseen shield and reminder. Returning to Ezreal's apartment, I declined lunch with a soft, grateful smile, retreating into contemplation. I slipped the printed agreement into my purse behind the family photo I had taken from my parents' mantel, a tangible record of both the deception and the loyalty I had maintained. Two sides of a coin, held in balance, ready for the moment I would choose to act. Opening a new folder on his laptop, labeled Reclaiming, I felt the first sparks of a plan forming. The past was heavy, yes, but now it was also a weapon. And I was ready to wield it. The invitation to stay for dinner felt like a trap wrapped in civility. I had accepted cautiously, stepping into the familiar yet suffocating space of my parents' Portland home, hoping for clarity, maybe an explanation that would make sense. The living room greeted me with its polished wall portraits, the carefully arranged family memorabilia, all frozen snapshots of a past I could no longer claim as my own. My mother's tight smile barely concealed the tension, while my father's avoidance of my gaze was almost painful in its deliberate distance. I could feel their eyes on me, the unspoken judgment pressing down, making me hyper-aware that I was under scrutiny, observed more than welcomed. I didn't wait for polite conversation. I demanded to know why the beach house deed had been transferred, my voice steady but heavy with restrained anger. My father fumbled for words, while my mother defended the choice with a cold efficiency. Deandra's more stable, you've always been too volatile. The words sliced through me, but I refused to falter. I countered with years of proof, examples of my care, financial responsibility, and the countless hours I devoted to keeping the property alive. Her eyes narrowed, lips pressed into a thin line, and she accused me of drama, painting me in the shadow of Deandra's perfection. I reminded myself inwardly, I am not the daughter whose emotions you get to dismiss. Unable to sustain the confrontation, I stepped into the hallway, my pulse rattling in my ears. The faint creak of the floor beneath my feet seemed louder than usual. A door ajar revealed Deandra's voice, shrill and mocking, echoing through the corridor on speaker. "She's losing it. It was always easier to gaslight her," she sneered to someone on the other end. Time slowed, the words cutting deeper than any blow. My stomach churned, yet I forced myself to remain silent, absorbing the sting before retreating back into the living room, carrying the weight of this fresh wound. Calmness, deliberate and controlled, became my shield. I requested my mother read aloud the document I had uncovered at Ezreal's, the agreement that stripped me of the beach house without contest. Every clause reverberated through the room, full execution without contest, bearing the signatures of my parents, the finality undeniable. My father's face paled, the facade of authority cracking. I laid down the truth plainly, you never asked me. You simply executed me out. Reaching for the photo album on the shelf, I let it fall to the table. Family images scattered across the polished surface, fragments of a narrative rewritten without my consent, silent testimony to years of favoritism and deceit. I did not demand apologies. I sat, letting the gravity of what I had revealed sink into the room. Each breath I drew was a quiet assertion of self-worth, a reminder that my life, my accomplishments, my teaching, and my relationships extended far beyond the judgments of those who sought to diminish me. Their voice does not define me. Their document may take space, but I still occupy life, I repeated to myself, a mantra of quiet resilience. Gathering my coat, I prepared to leave, aware that exiting would mark not defeat, but deliberate authority. At the front door, I paused, the rain-soaked evening pressing against the glass. I gave you my years. You decided my worth in days, I said softly, stepping into the damp street. Behind me, the shattered photo album remained, a testament to both my loss and my endurance. Across the way, a neighbor's light flicked on, and I caught a glimpse of Deandra at the window, her face blank, unyielding. The night draped over the street, but her silhouette lingered in my vision, a silent challenge that had yet to be answered. Morning light seeped through the blinds of my temporary rental, painting the walls in pale stripes. I woke early, still carrying the weight of the previous evening's confrontation like an invisible coat. Sitting at the small kitchen table, I opened my journal and reread the notes I had scribbled in moments of quiet rage the night before. My parents' words echoed in my mind, their casual dismissal, the stark favoritism toward Deandra, the way my own accomplishments had been minimized as if they were insignificant. I pondered fairness and whether my family had ever truly seen me as competent. The thought of Deandra, always the golden child, smiled smugly somewhere beyond the walls, made my jaw tighten. Internally, I whispered, I've been the silent keeper of all that mattered. How did this become my punishment? I reached for the secured envelope I had brought with me, the one containing the property documents I had retrieved from the hidden folder. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it, and I spread the papers across the table. At first glance, they seemed standard, but my eyes caught an obscure clause buried deep within the fine print. It granted Deandra authority to execute actions concerning the property without my knowledge or consent. I read it again, slower this time, annotating each line in my notebook. Each word felt like a deliberate erasure of my years of care, my quiet stewardship. Disbelief settled in, followed by a rising indignation. My parents had maneuvered with precision, hiding their favoritism under the guise of practicality, presenting it as justifiable, when in reality it was a calculated slight. I stood and began pacing the small apartment, letting my mind map out possible responses. Confrontation now seemed almost secondary to strategy, patience and careful planning would be far more powerful. I cataloged in my head the proof I had, records of financial contributions, maintenance logs, messages confirming my diligence. Witnesses who had seen me tirelessly manage the property came to mind. Appearing calm while methodically building my case gave me a psychological advantage, a quiet strength that no outburst could match. Every step I considered was part of a deliberate plan, a slow build-up designed to reclaim what had been stripped from me. A ping on my phone startled me, a text from a distant cousin I hadn't heard from in years. Surprisingly, the message wasn't casual. It hinted at awareness of family history, subtle support, and knowledge of the favoritism I had endured. We exchanged words cautiously, and she shared additional stories of parental manipulation, confirming my suspicions. For the first time since the beach house was taken, I felt a spark of hope. I was not entirely isolated. Our conversation hinted at a possible meeting where Deandra's arrogance could be publicly exposed, an opportunity to combine legal leverage with the emotional truth I now possessed. The pieces were falling into place, and the plan I had been forming in fragments suddenly had structure and purpose. By mid-morning, I had assembled the documents, my annotations, and the contacts who could verify my years of contributions. I sat back, taking a deep breath, silently repeating to myself, I will not be invisible. I will reclaim what is rightfully mine. Calm determination replaced raw anger, though the simmering heat beneath the surface reminded me that this was far from over. I rehearsed the steps in my mind, anticipating both parental pushback and Deandra's inevitable reaction. Each scenario had a counter, each move a measured response. The strategy became as much about self-preservation as about justice. As I rose and moved toward the door, ready to step into the day with purpose, a new alert flashed across my screen. An anonymous tip: Deandra had already changed the locks on an additional property linked to the inheritance. My lips pressed into a thin line, the message confirming what I had suspected. She would not wait for me to act, and neither would I. Clutching the envelope tightly in one hand, I paused at the doorway, feeling the weight of both history and strategy in my grasp. The next steps would require patience, cunning, and the unwavering resolve that had been cultivated through years of being underestimated. With one final breath, I stepped forward, ready to confront the truth I had uncovered. The coastal road leading to my parents' home stretched ahead, the winter sun slicing through clouds, casting long shadows across the pavement. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, each turn and bump reinforcing the tension coiling inside me. The changes were subtle the moment I pulled into the driveway: new locks, faint scuff marks on the doorframe, and the unmistakable sign that Deandra was already there, asserting ownership before I even set foot inside. My mind replayed strategies as I paused, taking a deep breath to center myself. Anger simmered, yes, but determination ruled the moment. There were patterns here, evidence suggesting my parents had facilitated her moves, their silence a silent approval that made the betrayal sting sharper. I stepped from the car, pacing deliberately as I approached the house, measuring every footfall, feeling the weight of anticipation tighten in my chest. I found Deandra in the sunroom, smirking as if the world had always been hers. I addressed her politely at first, my voice even, controlled. Deandra, the locks. You don't have the right to change them without my consent. She rolled her eyes, dismissive, the perfect picture of the golden child who never needed to justify herself. My parents lingered in the background, passive, their silence only amplifying my sense of humiliation and righteous anger. I could feel my pulse quicken, the room charged with tension as my carefully restrained fury began to flare. Deandra waved a hand, casually ignoring my words, asserting her dominance without needing to speak the words aloud. The first confrontation ended with her smile, as if my warnings were invisible, and I realized that my attempts at reason were futile. Determined not to be blindsided again, I turned my attention to the documents I had brought. Flipping through them, I discovered unauthorized changes affecting a secondary property, actions taken without my knowledge, without consultation. The pattern was unmistakable, deliberate, a quiet attempt to erase my authority while flaunting familial power dynamics. My indignation spiked, mixed with urgency. I had to act before further losses accumulated. Every scrap of evidence, every witness who could validate my past efforts and authority, became critical. I began mentally cataloging them, planning meticulously, each step measured to ensure control over a situation designed to humiliate me. The stakes had risen sharply, and I felt the tempo of my thoughts accelerate, racing to anticipate the next move before Deandra could make it. Reaching for my phone, I dialed my cousin and a few trusted allies. Coordinating quietly, I outlined the steps we would take, document every action, capture proof, establish a timeline of parental complicity, and prepare for a controlled confrontation combining legal leverage with public exposure. My anger was now tempered with strategy, each plan reinforced my empowerment. I envisioned the confrontation, carefully timed, calm in demeanor yet undeniable in force. Unauthorized access, the hidden patterns, the deliberate silences, they would all be laid bare. Every short burst of tension in my mind was deliberate, each scenario anticipating responses, reactions, and counterplays. The stakes had crystallized, Deandra's audacity and my parents' complacency could no longer operate in the shadows. As I gathered my documents and notes, preparing for the next move, I paused to reflect. If they assumed I would back down, they had misjudged me entirely. Confidence mixed with anticipation, a slow burn of controlled tension. My hand tightened around the envelope containing the critical papers, each page a testament to patience, observation, and the quiet gathering of evidence. A message appeared on my phone, a cryptic alert suggesting Deandra may already have backup plans I hadn't accounted for. My jaw set. This was more than a property dispute now, it was a test of endurance, intelligence, and the resolve I had honed over decades of navigating underestimation and subtle betrayals. I exhaled slowly, preparing to move forward, knowing every decision from here could redefine the playing field. The confrontation had escalated, but so had my readiness. I sat in the corner of the small coastal cafe, sunlight filtering through the foggy windows, coffee cooling beside me, and my mind a swirl of strategy. I spread the documents across the table, evidence of every slight, every hidden clause, every deliberate move Deandra and my parents had orchestrated. The patterns were clear now, weaknesses in their plan that had gone unnoticed during my initial confrontations. I traced each misstep in my notebook, connecting the dots, figuring out exactly where to strike. A trusted family friend joined me quietly, nodding as I outlined the situation. Their presence was reassuring, validation of my instincts lent a quiet boost to my confidence. The air in the cafe seemed to hum with anticipation, and I felt the tension in my chest morph into calculated determination. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was preparing to turn the tide. Later, discreet calls connected me to allies who had knowledge of both legal and family intricacies. One shared insider details confirming my suspicions, unauthorized property actions, subtle manipulations, and Deandra's audacious overreach. Each piece of information tightened the focus of my plan. We discussed a coordinated approach, public exposure coupled with legal leverage, ensuring every step was precise. Relief washed over me, mingled with renewed determination, the tide was shifting. The allies' insight revealed crucial blind spots in Deandra's behavior, weaknesses that, if exploited with care, could dismantle her facade. I could almost feel the momentum swing in my favor, every heartbeat a drumbeat of strategy and anticipation. Returning home in the late afternoon, I pored over contracts and prior agreements, my eyes scanning for clauses that had been overlooked. There they were, legal leverage I hadn't previously recognized, a pathway to reclaiming authority over the property, and with it, a portion of power that Deandra assumed she had permanently seized. The documents were meticulous, dated months before my confrontation, and signed by me, yet clearly granting rights in my favor. The discovery shifted the balance, transforming frustration into tactical opportunity. Confidence crept in as I prepared each file, each note, imagining the face of my parents and Deandra when confronted with undeniable proof. The stakes had climbed sharply, the game was no longer about defense, but a poised, controlled counter-strike. I spent the evening assembling evidence, drafting formal communications, and envisioning public exposure carefully woven with legal precision. My internal dialogue was firm, focused, every action calculated, ethical boundaries observed, every potential counter from Deandra anticipated. I rehearsed the confrontation, the words to speak, the timing to deliver impact without losing composure. Each document in my hands, each message saved, represented leverage built over months of silent observation and careful planning. Anger simmered beneath the surface, restrained, directed into strategy rather than chaos. The tempo of my mind was intense, bursts of rapid-fire planning followed by moments of reflective pause, ensuring no misstep could undo the progress I had meticulously constructed. As dusk fell over Portland, I felt the weight of readiness settle over me. Every ally coordinated, every document in place, the evidence undeniable. I stared at the envelope containing the pivotal files, breathing slowly, imagining the confrontation to come. Internal resolve hardened. I would not be underestimated again. The game had changed, the upper hand was within reach. My pulse raced, but my demeanor remained calm. A final message lit up my phone, hinting that Deandra might have an unexpected countermeasure, yet the risk only sharpened my focus. I clutched the envelope tighter, feeling the surge of anticipation and control. Tonight, the next move could make or break everything, but I was ready. The tide was turning, and this time, I held the lever. I stepped into the coastal home, documents in hand, heart steady but pulse quickened. The late morning light slanted through the windows, catching the dust motes that seemed to dance like the tension in the room. Family members trickled in, curious, wary, some even smug, but I held my composure. I placed the files on the dining table, organizing the evidence for maximum clarity. I had rehearsed every statement, anticipated every excuse, and prepared responses that left no room for deflection. My fingers lingered on the first set of papers, the weight of truth palpable. Every step I had taken until this moment, the silent observations, the careful documentation, the subtle accumulation of allies, was leading to this confrontation. This wasn't just a challenge, it was a reckoning. I began presenting the evidence calmly but assertively, letting each point land with precision. Deandra tried to deflect, her voice sharp with practiced superiority, but I countered with undeniable documentation, emails, contracts, and personal records that outlined my contributions and rights. I watched her falter, the first cracks in her facade appearing. Aunts and cousins shifted in their seats, some mouths falling open, others exchanging furtive glances, suddenly aware of the deception I had endured. Every misstep of Deandra, every omission by my parents, became transparent. The atmosphere shifted, the room leaned toward truth, and I could feel the subtle support growing, unnoticed until now. Their shock became my momentum. The public exposure of her manipulation spread silently through the room like a current I was finally steering. Unexpected allies stepped forward, family members who had stayed silent, perhaps intimidated or overlooked, now quietly affirming my claims. Their validation lent strength to my stance, their whispers supporting the evidence I presented. The dynamics shifted, Deandra's confidence wavered, replaced by defensiveness and tension. I kept my voice even, letting the facts speak louder than any emotion. Relief and empowerment surged through me as I realized these allies could tip the balance decisively. The hidden alliances, long ignored, emerged as crucial components of my strategy, transforming this confrontation from a private struggle to a collective acknowledgement of fairness. I then introduced the most damning evidence, hidden documentation, legal papers, and detailed accounts proving my rightful ownership and the pattern of favoritism. Deandra's composure faltered visibly as each page confirmed what she had hoped to hide. The room's energy shifted to a collective recognition, validation of my claims, acknowledgement of the years of silent dedication and loyalty erased by their calculated moves. I remained composed, each gesture controlled, projecting authority and clarity. The power dynamic had flipped, I was no longer the reactive party but the orchestrator of truth. The moment was electric, charged with vindication, and yet tempered by the bitter awareness of what had been lost. Deandra attempted one final maneuver, trying to manipulate the narrative with charm and selective truth, but my preparation rendered her powerless. Each document, each corroborating witness, left her assertions hollow. The room recognized the decisive turning point, a visible shift in respect and recognition toward me. Anger lingered, but triumph and validation overrode it. My measured strategy had unveiled the truth and commanded authority. As I collected the evidence, folding papers with quiet precision, I felt the unspoken acknowledgement that the tide had irrevocably turned. Yet, in the silence that followed, a sense of unease persisted, a whisper that Deandra's next move, unseen and unexpected, was still waiting. The confrontation had reached its peak, but the story was not over. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the coastal home as I walked through the quiet hallways, the echoes of the confrontation still fresh in my mind. Family members had shifted, some lingering in awkward reflection, others exchanging tentative apologies, but I felt a calm settle over me. Standing there, surveying the aftermath, I realized the victory wasn't just in exposing deceit, it was in reclaiming my voice, my place, my dignity. I had held my ground, and now the balance had subtly, irrevocably changed. The past's weight no longer crushed me, it had shaped my strategy, my resilience, and my clarity. I breathed in deeply, letting the ocean air remind me that even after storms, the tide eventually returns to its rhythm. Deandra faced consequences as quietly as the truth had unraveled. Legal avenues and social recognition began correcting the manipulations she had orchestrated, leaving her defensive, begrudgingly compliant. Family members who had once been silent now acknowledged the depth of her wrongdoing, validating my persistence and strategic foresight. I observed her reactions, denial, fleeting anger, reluctant acceptance, and felt a strange detachment. It was not triumph over her alone but affirmation of justice and principle. The house, once a stage for favoritism and hidden agendas, now became a space where accountability and recognition held sway. Moral satisfaction settled over me like a steady tide, quieting the inner turbulence I had carried for years. Officially, I reclaimed my legacy, the property, the documents, the recognition that had been denied for far too long. The paperwork was more than ink on paper, it was a symbol of years of care, contribution, and integrity finally acknowledged. Family members who had been skeptical or indifferent began to offer small gestures of respect, their eyes reflecting an understanding that had been withheld for decades. I allowed myself a private moment of pride, considering how far I had come, from silent endurance to active reclamation. Plans for personal and professional growth filled my thoughts, practical and deliberate, grounded in the reality that I now had both authority and perspective to move forward. Rebuilding relationships required patience. Some relatives gravitated closer, offering warmth and quiet companionship, understanding the struggle I had endured. Deandra remained largely estranged, her presence a reminder of lessons learned about trust, boundaries, and the limits of forgiveness. Conversations were careful, but genuine connections began to mend, strengthened by honesty and mutual recognition of past misjudgments. The balance between reconciliation and self-preservation became clear, not all bridges needed crossing, but the ones that mattered were restored with care. Optimism bloomed cautiously, tempered by the memory of deception, yet stronger for the wisdom earned. As evening settled and I stood by the ocean, waves brushing the sand, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The envelope from the first confrontation rested in my bag, a talisman of persistence and strategy. I thought of the beach house, the family home, the documents, the allies, everything converged into a narrative of resilience. The scars remained, subtle but instructive, reminders of the boundaries tested and lessons learned. I felt the horizon open before me, a promise of potential yet untapped. Standing by the water, I let the waves wash over the past, feeling the rhythm of forward movement and the quiet assurance that the future, though unpredictable, held space for growth, strength, and the life I had fought to reclaim.